we're winding down the last few kings of Judah. The kings of Israel are gone. In fact, Israel is gone. It went into Assyrian captivity 100 or so years before where we are right now, maybe 120 years. And we're down to about the last 4 kings or so. There we go. We're down to basically Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah over here on the right side, the last 3 or so. And it turns out that during the entire period of, Josiah, this last good king right here, from Josiah all the way through Zedekiah, who has another name that we'll catch on to here later. They changed his name to Zedekiah. But those 5 kings all knew Jeremiah, and Jeremiah knew them. He lived during that period. And so he writes extensively about what's going on. If you go into the book of Jeremiah, it's not just the typical poetic prophecy. You know, it's actually historical information. A large fraction of Jeremiah is very parallel and historically related to what's going on. And we were down, actually we had moved a little beyond Jehoiakim, but I want to back up just a little bit. And if you look at the 25th chapter of Jeremiah, it says, "The word came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah." So, as you remember, this is Jehoiakim down here. He's actually the grandson of Josiah, but Jehoahaz was such a nasty guy, they just kind of forgot him, and they just, many times they will refer to a grandfather or a great-grandfather or even a great-great-grandfather as the father of this person. So he just skips the other guy altogether. And he says that it was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. We're in Jeremiah chapter 25. So Jeremiah the prophet said to all the people of Judah and to all those living in Jerusalem, for 23 years from the 13th year of Josiah, son of Amun, king of Judah, until this very day, the word of Jehovah has come to me, and I have spoken to you again and again, but you have not listened. And though Jehovah has sent all his servants, the prophets, to you again and again, you have not listened or paid any attention. They said, "Turn now, each of you," the prophets, they said, "Turn now, each of you, from your evil ways and your evil practices, and you can stay in the land Jehovah gave to you and your ancestors forever and ever. Do not follow other gods to serve and worship them. Do not arouse my anger with what your hands have made, then I will not harm you. But you did not listen to me, declares Jehovah, and you have aroused my anger with what your hands have made," meaning idols and other things, "and you have brought harm to yourselves. Therefore Jehovah Almighty says this, because you've not listened to my words, I will summon all the peoples of the north, and my servant," now that's an interesting turn of a phrase, "my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, declares Jehovah, and I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants and against all the surrounding nations. I will completely destroy them and make them an object of horror and scorn and an everlasting ruin. I will banish from them the sounds of joy and gladness, the voices of bride and bridegroom, the sound of millstones," meaning prosperity, business going on, they're grinding corn or wheat or something, "and the light of the lamp. This whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. But when the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation, the land of the Babylonians, for their guilt, declares Jehovah, and will make it desolate forever. I will bring on that land all the things I have spoken against it, all that are written in this book and prophesied by Jeremiah against all the nations. They themselves will be enslaved by many nations and great kings. I will repay them according to their deeds and the work of their hands." So Jeremiah is saying before Nebuchadnezzar has attacked, and we actually got up to the point where he is attacked last week, he is saying that you're going to go into captivity for 70 years. And it turns out they actually do go into captivity for 70 years. And then they come back to the land. So he has prophesied this terrible thing. If you go in and read, Jeremiah is like 40 chapters long. It's quite long. And there's a huge amount of historical additional information in there that goes on in this time frame, if you happen to be interested in that sort of thing. 56 chapters. I'm sorry, I was remembering the wrong book at 40 chapters. There's also, if you go in and read Jeremiah, you will see that he had a secretary whose name was either Baruch or Baruch. I'm not sure how that's correctly pronounced, and I'm not sure anyone knows for certain. And apparently that means something like blessed. He had a secretary who wrote, and he's mentioned numerous times in Jeremiah, and there's actually a book of Baruch or Baruch, which is part of the apocryphal Old Testament, or some people use the word pseudepigraphal. In other words, it's not for sure that it's an inspired book of the Old Testament. The Catholic Bible includes it as one of the books, along with some of the other things that they include that we don't include. And it's okay. I mean, it's a short little book, and it's okay. But we don't normally quote from it or use it in our Christian Bible. Anyway, so he has given this prophecy that they're going to go into captivity at the hands of the Babylonians for 70 years. If you remember, he said, "My servant Nebuchadnezzar." Now that can mean two different things. That can mean someone who acknowledges me and willingly serves me, which is what we're supposed to do, or someone who does not acknowledge God and is unwillingly serving him. In other words, he is a vessel of God's, either without knowledge or against his will, which is kind of interesting too. And Nebuchadnezzar is not a believer. In fact, he suffers some pretty rough things in his life. At one point, I believe he starts living like an animal for quite some time. But anyway, he says, "I'm using this guy as an instrument of my vengeance," basically, is what he's saying. "Hey, dear, how's your eye?"
It's doing. I've got to go to the city if I have to do it.
Are they putting medicine in it to try to reduce the pressure? Okay, well, hopefully that'll work. Are they going to just go in and reduce pressure by taking some of the stuff out, or what?
I guess.
It's magic, you know. I had something called vitrectomies on my eyes, where they take everything out and fill it back with some kind of hydrochloric acid or something. I'm not sure what, but maybe they'll do something like that. Those are, to encourage you, that's fairly easy for them to do. So, you know, I know it's stressful, but when it's you know what minor surgery is, don't you? Minor surgery is something what?
Somebody else.
It's something somebody else gets. Anything you get is major surgery every time. So what we might think of as minor surgery, in your case, is major surgery, dear. We'll be remembering you in our prayers, dear.
So,
yes, sir.
Minor surgery is what they do on coal miners.
On what? On coal miners? Yes, minor surgery. There you go. They do surgery on coal miners and other people who dig in the ground for things like that. All right, so we have Jeremiah doing all of his prophesying during this time period and having a very long book that recounts both prophecies, poetic and otherwise, as well as historical information. And so Jehoiakim, and we're actually reviewing now, Jehoiakim in chapter 24 of 2 Kings comes into power. It's pretty obvious that they're going to be taken over by Babylon, because it says immediately that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invades Jehoiakim's land and they become his vassal for 3 years. He lives for a while, dies. Then Jehoiachin, his son, comes in and reigns for 18, he was 18 years old, but he only reigned for 3 months. So he was not king for very long. He does evil in the eyes of God. Verse 10, Nebuchadnezzar's people advance on Jerusalem and put a siege to it. Nebuchadnezzar himself comes to the city to participate in this siege. He takes Jehoiachin prisoner, took away all the gold and the silver and the precious items out of the temple and out of the palace and everything. And he takes Jehoiachin, I can't keep him straight, in verse 15, captive to Babylon. along with his wives and his officials and the prominent people. Then Nebuchadnezzar makes another person, it looks like Mattaniah, Jehoiachin's uncle, king. He's essentially a puppet king at that point, and he changes his name to Zedekiah, which is the last king down there at the bottom. So Zedekiah, being a puppet king, comes into rule at age 21. He serves 11 years, and he was also not a good guy. So Zedekiah, even though he's a puppet king, in chapter 25 rebels against the king of Babylon, and we are still reviewing stuff we've already covered. That's why I'm moving so quickly. So Zedekiah suffers the wrath of Nebuchadnezzar, and it says in verse 3 of chapter 25, by the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city had become so severe that there was no food for the people to eat. The army broke down the wall, fled through the night between the two walls near the king's garden, through the Babylonians, somehow, I don't know how they did that, surrounding the city, and they fled, and they pursued the king. Apparently he went with them, and overtook him in the plains, and they were separated and scattered, and the king was captured. Taken to the king at Riblah, they pronounced sentence on him, killed his sons before his eyes, then put his eyes out, bound him in brass shackles, and took him to Babylon. And that's where we ended last time. Then verse 8, it says, on the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, there's another commander here who has a very similar name to it, Nebuzaradan, I guess, but it starts out Nebu. His commander come to Jerusalem. They set fire to the temple and the palace and the houses. I would have lived in them myself. But they destroy everything and break down the walls around Jerusalem to make it indefensible. And he carries the people off into exile. So at first they had not carried the people off. They had just taken kind of the top officials and the king away. Now they're destroying the city, taking the people into captivity. It says in verse 13 that they broke up the bronze pillars and the movable stands and the bronze sea, which is basically a very large hot tub, I guess, some thousands of gallons, that were at the temple of Jehovah. They carried the bronze to Babylon because bronze was valuable. They also took away the pots, shovels, wick trimmers, dishes, and all the bronze articles used in the temple service. And they took the censers and the sprinkling bowls and all that were made of pure gold or silver. All of this stuff had been made 1,000 years ago. And so they were, and it says it was more than could be weighed, a lot, in other words. And they described some of those things in some detail there. He took prisoners in verse 18. Lots and lots of people were taken captive. They took them down to Riblah, the other place where the king had met with the king, where Nebuchadnezzar had met with the king of Israel. I can't say these things straight. King of Judah, and they executed those folks instead of taking them captive. So Judah goes into captivity, and Nebuchadnezzar appoints a governor in verse 22, Gedaliah, to be over the people that he had left behind. Basically, they just leave the poorest of the people who don't really have a lot of pull or influence or anything to work the land. They kind of give him the people of Judah kind of give him their allegiance. And he says, don't be afraid of the Babylonian officials. Settle down in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will go well with you. It says, however, in the 7th month, Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, who was of royal blood, came with 10 men and assassinated Gedaliah, and also the men of Judah and the Babylonians who were with him. So you can imagine that would not please the king Nebuchadnezzar. So it says, at this, all the people from the least to the greatest, together with the army officers, fled to Egypt for fear of the Babylons. Good thinking. And then we come to the very end of 2 Kings, and it says in the 37th year, so basically halfway through the 70 years, 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the year, this is a cool king's name. Bill, is that Awel Marduk? Say it again? Evel Morodach. Depending on how they spell it, in different versions, who knows how to pronounce it, but I'll go with your pronunciation. He becomes king of Babylon. That's a name we don't usually associate with Babylon. He releases Jehoiachin from prison. He does this in the 27th day of the 12th month. It's interesting that they give the exact date. Spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat of honor higher than those of the other kings who were with him in Babylon. These are all kings that the Babylonians had captured. So Jehoiachin put aside his prison clothes and for the rest of his life ate regularly at the king's table. Day by day the king gave Jehoiachin a regular allowance as long as he lived. It does not say why, but apparently he was very nice to the guy. So that guy actually got much better treatment than was typical of the time, I guess. So I'm going to jump over to 2 Chronicles chapter 36. There's a little more information that they give here. Says in 2 Chronicles 36, verse 15, Jehovah, the God of their ancestors, sent word to them through his messengers again and again because he had pity on his people and on his dwelling place. And I mentioned to you before that he had been doing this for 1,000 years. He'd been trying for 1,000 years to get their attention. But they mocked God's messengers, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets until the wrath of Jehovah was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. He brought up against them the king of the Babylonians, who killed their young men with the sword in the sanctuary, and did not spare young men or young women, the elderly or the infirm. God gave them all into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. He carried to Babylon all the articles from the temple of God, both large and small, and the treasure of Jehovah's temple, and the treasures of the king and his officials. They set fire to God's temple and broke down the wall of Jerusalem. They burned all the palaces and destroyed everything of value there. Again, notice they don't mention the Ark of the Covenant. They don't mention it. And you would have thought that if he had taken it, the Jews would have said so. And if they had not taken it, for some reason, you would have thought the Jews would have said he took everything but the Ark of the Covenant, maybe. This suggests that it was hidden. I have no idea what was actually the case, but they don't mention it.
Is that when they burned the temple and broke the walls down and burned all the palaces, but they did not burn all of the humble houses.
Yes, they left the humble houses. They leave the poor alone. They don't view them as a threat. And somebody needs to till the land and provide tax money. So, it always falls on the poor, I guess, in that case. They destroy the government seat so that there is no leadership. In fact, if you remember when they went back in and assassinated, what was his name, Gedaliah or whatever it was one of the guys from the royal bloodline. It wasn't just the people that came up and killed this guy. They were okay with it. They weren't going to do anything. But it's always, shall I say it's always the politicians? I don't know. We'll let that one go. Anyway, so they are taking everything out of Jerusalem except for the poorest of the poor and what little bit they have to till the land, I guess. It says he carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and his successors until the kingdom of Persia came to power. The land enjoyed its Sabbath rests. All the time of its desolation it rested until the 70 years were completed, as Jeremiah had said. Now, that's basically the end of both 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. Jeremiah 29 is a letter that Jeremiah writes. He's apparently still in Jerusalem, in Judah. And he apparently was viewed as a poor person and not very influential. He writes a letter to the people in Babylon. And this is the 29th chapter of Jeremiah. This goes on for many, many more chapters past that. says, "This is the text of the letter that the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all other people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." Now, that is strange. He carried a bunch of prophets, but he didn't take Jeremiah for some reason. Parenthetically, it says, "This was after King Jehoiachin and the queen mother, the court officials, and the leaders of Judah and Jerusalem, the skilled workers and the artisans, had gone into exile from Jerusalem. He entrusted the letter to Elisha, I guess is how that's pronounced, or Elisha, and I won't go into the other relations he had. It said, 'This is what Jehovah Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those that I carried into exile.'" Notice he doesn't say Nebuchadnezzar carried them. He says that I carried into exile, God that is, from Jerusalem to Babylon. Now this is interesting recommendation that God gives them. He says, "Build houses in Babylon, settle down, plant gardens, and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to Jehovah for it." That is, for the prosperity of the city. Pray for the prosperity of Babylon. "Because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what Jehovah Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I've not sent them, declares Jehovah." I'm going to read some more here in a second, but that's very strange. He's saying, prosper in this period of captivity. This makes me immediately think all the way back to Egypt. This small family. How many people was it that went into Egypt? 70. I couldn't remember the exact number. 70 people go into Egypt, and estimates of somewhat in the range of 1 million to 2 million people come out in 400-ish years, 430 years, I guess it was. Sometimes you have to look back at these things and go, wow, that was a bad thing. But God was actually protecting them in Egypt so that they could grow.
Joe, the interesting thing, after 70 years, there's only 25,000 people who returned from captivity.
There were way more, but that's all that came back. And I think they even say, we've had our lives here for all this time. Our children were born here, and their children were born here. We're just going to stay. So there is the very strong possibility, based on what we're seeing here, that God is working this exile out in such a way that it's going to work to the advantage of the coming Messiah. Because if they had stayed as they were, there's a very good chance they could have been wiped out utterly. Just completely destroyed. And there would be no lineage to the Messiah. And so it doesn't say he did that, but him telling them to settle down, live, prosper, pray for the city, that's implying that he's going to bless them in their exile. Did you have something else to say?
In chapter 43, it says that Jeremiah was taken to Egypt.
Okay, so he was in another place at the time. And so again, this may have been God's, desire that he not be taken to Babylon. But we have other prophets like Ezekiel and Daniel that did end up in the exile, and they have provide information about the exile also. So from into Assyria. Okay. That's right. He was a member of the royal blood. They never recovered from the Assyrian captivity, did they? I haven't studied it that far yet.
Actually, what happens is that they go into Assyrian captivity, and then very shortly after that, the Babylons overtake Syria,
And so it becomes just part of the Babylonian captivity.
But there's no specific that I know of. Maybe I'm wrong. There's no specific mention of a general return from the Assyrian area back. It's only from Babylon that they come back. So.
For some reason, Daniel ends up in Babylon itself, the capital.
So maybe they moved, who knows? Anyway, a lot of things are not explained to us. But anyway, it's a very rich and long history there that we usually don't know very much at all about because we tend not to read this stuff.
And this king that's mentioned, this Evil
Uh-huh.
Was only king for 1 year.
Yeah, he was apparently not very good at it. Who became the next king? Do you have it?
Yeah, Nerig-Lisar, who was his brother-in-law, and he only served for 3 years.
When did, let's see, you have a whole list of kings there before Persia takes over, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and we don't know hardly any of those names. Do you see any name that we might recognize down through there?
Nabonidus and Belshazzar.
Belshazzar I would recognize because he's mentioned in what, Daniel?
Yeah.
He's the one that saw the handwriting.
Right, so we would know that.
He only served 1 year also.
Okay, so they have a
But
whole
actually less than 1 year.
Yeah, rise and fall in 1 year. You get your 15 minutes of fame, and then part of your family assassinates you or something. So Jeremiah continues to write to the people. He said, settle down, live your lives, prosper. Verse 15, we're still in Jeremiah 9? Yeah. You may say, Jehovah has raised up prophets for us in Babylon, but this is what Jehovah says about the king who sits on David's throne and all the people who remain in this city. So this is fairly early in the thing. Your fellow citizens who did not go with you into exile, yes, this is what Jehovah Almighty says, I will send the sword and famine and plague against them, and I will make them like figs that are so bad they cannot be eaten. That's pretty bad. I will pursue them with the sword, famine, and plague, and will make them abhorrent to all the kingdoms of the earth, a curse and an object of horror, of scorn and reproach among all the nations where I drive them. For they have not listened to my words, declares Jehovah, words that I sent to them again and again by my servants, the prophets. And you, exiles, have not listened either, declares Jehovah. Therefore, hear the word of Jehovah, all you exiles whom I have sent away from Jerusalem to Babylon. This is what Jehovah Almighty, the God of Israel, says about Ahab, son of Kolaiah, or something like that, and Zedekiah, son of Maaseiah, who are prophesying. These are prophets. These are not names that we have heard before of kings and things. Who are prophesying lies to you in my name. I will deliver them into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he will put them to death before your very eyes. Because of them, all the exiles from Judah who are in Babylon will use this curse. May Jehovah treat you like Zedekiah and Ahab, whom the king of Babylon burned in the fire. That's a pretty mean curse. For they have done outrageous things in Israel. They have committed adultery with their neighbors' wives, and in my name they have uttered lies which I did not authorize. I know it and am a witness to it, declares Jehovah. And so, all of the kings that Bill mentioned do their thing for a while, and then if we go right back to... let's see, I'm in 2 Chronicles for just a few seconds here. At the end of 2 Chronicles, verse 22, it says, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of Jehovah spoken by Jeremiah, which we just have been reading, Jehovah moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia. Now, they had beaten Babylon. So the Assyrians had come along, the Babylonians had beaten the Assyrians, and now the Persians are beating the Babylonians. And all of this is going on in Iraq, Turkey, Syria, and that whole region. These people seem never to get over fighting, I guess. They constantly fight. But anyway, we're now into the Persian Empire, which was possibly, I guess, the Persian Empire was one of the largest ever, if not the largest empire. Up to that point.
Joe, also, to insert in this, it was only about 65 years between
Yeah, they were the only ones, I guess, of significance to them.
He was evidently had no power during the other times.
Yeah,
But they were very short-lived, most of
yeah,
them anyway.
yeah. So sometimes we miss chunks of history just because it's left out and people don't consider it important, I suppose, at that point. Yeah, that's another. A lot of these books that we are kind of disjointed for us, like Esther, she was there during the Persian Empire. And so the whole story of Esther is around the Jewish people and her and the king of Persia near the end of the carrying away or the exile. So it says, Jehovah moves the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing, which basically makes it absolutely so. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. Now, it's interesting. He says some words that you wouldn't expect from someone like that. Jehovah, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. And apparently there was some influence by the Jews on him to some extent. He knew who Jehovah was. Has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed to me to build a temple for him in Jerusalem in Judah. So God takes the king of the world and says, you need to let those people go and go build a temple for me. And any of his people, or any of his people among you, may go up, and may Jehovah their God be with them. And I think that's the end of everything there. So, we have been covering 1,000 years of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. They've rebelled against God over and over and over again. God sends them into Assyrian captivity, the people in Israel, the northern kingdom. 100 and so years later, he sends the kingdom of Judah, which was the core of Israel, into Babylonian captivity. Multiple empires rise and fall during that period of roughly 70 years after the last group goes in. And then God says, okay, it's time for them to come back. And then we have the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which detail the story of them coming back and rebuilding. Also, during this whole period have been the vast majority of the prophets coming along. All of the major prophets have occurred during these periods. Most of the minor prophets, we've got, I think, Micah, Malachi, and one or two others that come after all of them. But we have Ezekiel and Daniel, who are during the captivity. So all these prophets are in a fairly tight period of time, all 17 books, 16 prophets since Jeremiah wrote both Jeremiah and Lamentations. All of these people are in here doing all this prophecy at one time. And then after Micah finishes in around 300 BC, which is a couple of hundred years from here, almost 300 years from here. Well, I guess after the 70-year thing, that would be down to about 500 AD. So he does his prophecy and ends in about 300 BC. And then God goes silent for 300 years. No more prophets, nothing. Dead silence. Several years ago, you might remember we did a class on that. It's called There Was Silence in Heaven for 1 Hour, which comes out of Revelation. God goes silent for 300 years, and they knew it. There were writings that says, why isn't God talking to us anymore? And then people started writing interesting little books like the Book of Enoch and some of these other books because there was this vacuum of God speaking to them. And so people just decided to write something to try to fill that void. And that silence was to separate the old kingdom, the old covenant, from the new covenant coming in the time of Christ. But silence was very important, that there be this. You've noticed when people are speaking sometimes, they will stop. It gets uncomfortable, doesn't it? Real fast. They will stop in the speech to set the stage for something really, really important that's coming. And this is essentially what one could say God is doing. After the last of the few prophets finish their prophecy, in fact, the last word in Malachi is curse. I will strike the earth with a curse if you don't do something. And that's the last word for 300 years. And then Christ comes forth. And then we have several people who prophesy during that period. So, we've come to the end of this study. I haven't decided for sure which direction I'm going to go in next. I have several possibilities in mind. But we'll see where that happens, where that goes next week, which will be the first Sunday in April. So we'll go from there. Now, blessing. In whatever circumstance you find yourself, whether it feels like a blessing or it feels like a curse, always, always may you bring glory and honor to the name of God through Christ our Lord. Amen.